To discuss this, we are joined by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to start by asking you how Iran internally is reacting to this idea of Russia helping mediate with the U.S.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. There are some flanks, not of Iranian society, but within the ever-narrowing Iranian political prism, what's basically left of the reformist flank, who through their media outlets and newspapers are very critical of this Russian potential intermediation between the U.S. and Iran. They're trying to co-opt what's left of the nationalist card for the regime, which is simply not a card that the regime has to play because it's an Islamist regime, not a nationalist one. But long story short, the silence actually speaks much more loudly. And the silence is that for about 1 or 2 decades, Iran's deep state or national security establishment has been willing to be junior partner and is looking to become a mid-level partner with the Russians so that they can keep the regime at home and export the revolution abroad. And this has meant closer military, political, and economic ties. And in exchange, the Russians have become Iran's lawyer at the IAEA, at the P5, and now, as you can see, allegedly between the U.S. And Iran. So I would say the part that is not speaking quite loudly is actually quite content with this, because it's part of their larger plan to get great power patronage, be it from Russia or China, to contest the E3 and America.
Right. So you mentioned Moscow being sort of Iran's lawyer, but where does Moscow stand really when it comes to Iran getting nuclear weapons?
This has really been an evolving debate over time. Obviously, even the official declared policy of America's great power rivals like Russia or China is that they don't want to see increased nuclear proliferation. And that's not just specific to Iran, but specific to other countries as well. But I would say as the geopolitical situation between Moscow and Washington, Beijing and Washington have changed, the willingness of these countries to increasingly look at Iran, perhaps not as an ally, but as a partner in this larger network that we could call an axis of aggressors that could be useful in bogging down America in the Middle East, that could be useful in contesting America's partners in the Middle East. And to that end, I do think you're seeing right now a revolution in the way the Russian state looks at the Iranian nuclear problem and the Iranian national security government. And so there, and long story short, I think that they wouldn't mind the Islamic Republic of Iran being a nuclear power.
They wouldn't mind. That's interesting. Now, how can a stronger Iran-Russia alliance affect the dynamics here in the Middle East, both in the short and longer term?
Well, I think the most important actor that a tightened political, military, economic, even nuclear relationship that between Russia and Iran would affect would first and foremost be Israel. I mean, there's a story just about a day and a half old now that says after Iran's historic April attack and before Iran's historic October attack, which was the largest ever single-day ballistic missile barrage in recorded history, the Russians had sent missile engineers to the Islamic Republic. So the more tighter, the more overt political security ties between Russia and Iran, the more serious Jerusalem is going to have to reconsider its ties with Russia.
So that was my next question, because it's particularly looking at these experts, missile experts, going from Russia to Iran and this increased cooperation between the two. What does Israel need to be looking out for specifically in this relationship, in this blooming friendship?
Well, naturally, Israel is going to have to be looking out for its own interests and see how those interests are correlated with the interests of the United States of America, which is increasingly seeing the world through the lens of this great power competition, being able to compete and beat Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. And Iran is in a very interesting place because it's at the bottom of the axis of aggressors, these states that we talked about, but it's at the top of the axis of resistance, these non-state actors that have long attacked Israel and America in the Middle East. And at the helm of that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. So for Israeli policymakers, for American policymakers, they're going to have to increasingly see the linkage between Iran and Russia and act in a more coordinated fashion to put the spotlight on it, to disrupt it, to detect it, and to offset it, whether that's in cyberspace or the battlefield.
Now, for Moscow's part, it is still looking to keep a sway and to keep influence in the Middle East, of course, with the the fall of its ally in Syria, where does it put Russia now, and how much does it need Iran? And we also know that it's keeping relations with other countries, and Iran is controversial here. How is Moscow navigating this?
Well, Moscow is looking to first and foremost prey on not just the states that are basically appendages of it now, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it's trying to keep whatever military footprint it has in the region, such as the diminishing naval and air base access that it has to small parts of Syria, specifically after the fall of the Assad regime. But, diplomatic and political goal number two, beyond maintaining that footprint, is to play on the hedging tendencies of the pro-American countries in the region, countries like the UAE, countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance, that may be upset with a certain kind of American policy in the region, whether that's oil politics with Saudi or anything else vis-a-vis the UAE, and to actually play upon the stress points between the traditional American order in the Middle East and America itself. And to that end, you couldn't have a better representation of what I'm saying than when Russian President Putin actually went to the UAE and actually had American jets paint the Russian flag in the sky as he was received with significant circumstance. Or much more recently, that Russian defense contractors are present at major defense expos in places like the UAE. These are slight hedges, slight changes that give Russia a potentially deeper foothold into the region to try to pry away, not overnight, but in the long term, some of the American business, economic, financial, and then potentially later political or security footprint in this part of the world.
All right, Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.